Hi, this is Michael Romita, the President and CEO of the Westchester County Association, the leading economic development and business advocacy group in the Lower Hudson Valley. I want to send a quick shout out to our hospital workers and our healthcare workers and our first responders, and to you at home. I hope you're all staying healthy and you're staying safe. And I want to thank you for tuning in and welcome you to our latest in a series of live stream video chats about issues that are important to businesses and nonprofits in Westchester County. We've done a number of these in the past, one on small business loans, the SBA loan program. We've done one on the state of the New York State economy. We've done one on what's going on in the healthcare sector. And today we've got a very special one on cybersecurity, particularly where people are starting to work from home and the remote work environment has become more popular. First, I want to thank all of our platinum sponsors at the Westchester County Association for funding our important work and for making these live stream video chats possible. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about cybersecurity for remote workforce. Even the tech savvy among us are adapting to a new way of working. And this has created some new challenges and has highlighted some privacy concerns and some cybersecurity risks inherent in a remote work environment. Those risks exist for the employer, for the employee, and also for customers and clients. So today we're going to talk about how companies and employees can protect themselves and their clients' materials and information from cybersecurity risks while working from home. We're also going to spend some time discussing the most popular video conferencing platform, Zoom, and talk about some simple ways to use it more effectively. I'm joined today by Jeff Wilson, the Chief Information Security Officer at Compufit LLC, a full-service IT support company specializing in tailored solutions for middle-market companies. Jeff, welcome to video chat.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Compufit and also about your job? What exactly is a Chief Information Security Officer?
Absolutely. Compufit is a managed services provider. We provide executive leadership support. We provide cloud services support. So if you have an on-premise server in your office and you'd like to go to this new fad called the cloud, we can assist with that. We also do full IT support from help desk to centralized services management to what I do, which is security services. So as a Chief Information Security Officer, my entire job revolves around assisting companies and their executive teams understanding of security as a whole and kind of helping them understand where their security risks lie and then how to help mitigate most of those risks.
So this is right in your roundhouse. I mean, as people have now navigated to an entirely new work environment, folks who used to be comfortable in an office setting are now working from home, calling in remotely, connecting through video conference with their clients and their coworkers, and also accessing their corporate systems via remote access. And some companies are experiencing this sort of environment for the first time. What are some of the issues and the problems that can arise in a setting that we're experiencing now?
Absolutely. Some of the problems that can arise are privacy security concerns. How do we connect all of our computers into our office environment? It's very simple when you're internal to a building that everybody's plugged in or there's a wireless access port hanging from the ceiling, and that's what people connect into. But when you're at home, it's a lot trickier because you're using the standard internet to get into your office environment. So one of the big things is trying to make sure that somebody has, or that all companies are utilizing some type of encryption tool to be able to get them access into their environment, to keep that privacy and that security.
So why is this so important? I mean, what sorts of information are hackers likely to find if they can hack into a network? And how would they use it?
Great question. Hackers don't really care the type of information that they get. They're looking for anything that they can sell. They're looking for names, addresses, any kind of personal identifiable information, social security numbers, credit card information, medical record numbers, anything that is valuable that they can sell on the dark web. So it doesn't matter if you have a company with 5 employees or a company that has 5,000. They're looking for any data that they can get their hands on. And actually, almost 50% of data breaches happen with small and mid-market companies. So a lot of companies believe that they're a little too small, or nobody would ever try and hack me because I don't have anything important. But that's not necessarily true when I actually sit down with these companies and talk to them about the type of data that they have on their network and discuss options of keeping that secure.
Well, actually, that makes a lot of sense because the larger companies are likely to have more robust and more sophisticated protections in place. And, if you're a hacker, you're basically looking for, the lowest hanging fruit. So you might want to target these smaller or mid-sized companies. And, you're talking about anything from social security numbers to other sorts of personal data and information that can be resold, and identity theft and things of that nature. So whose responsibility is it to make sure that the data is kept secure?
It's everybody's responsibility. So it's the employee's responsibility, the employer's responsibility. It's from the newest person in the company to executive leadership. Everybody does their part to make sure that when they're connecting into their office environment, that they are being as secure as possible.
All right, so let's break it down and start with the employee. You're working from home for the first time, or if it's not the first time, then more than you have in the past. What are some of the things that you need to start thinking about?
Sure. One of the first things that we look at is a secure workspace. So when you're working at home, and if you have a company laptop that you've been issued or a company desktop that they ship to your house, you want to make sure that you lock that up when it's not in use. If it's in your office, you want to close that door, making sure your kids or your spouse does not go in there and play games on it. Again, any business relevant information should be removed or be locked up when it's not in use. I've worked with certain places that are actually printing out medical records, or they're working through a lot of different things while they're at home. So again, anything that's printed out or your laptop, anything business related should really be locked up when it's not in use. Same thing with conversations. Again, conversation screens should all be private. You need to make sure that if there's visitors in your house, or if your kids are there, spouse again, that they're not shoulder surfing, that they're not listening into your conversations, making sure that your data that you're discussing, if it's confidential in nature, that you're keeping it secure. Treat it as your own. Would you want somebody in your company or somebody that has your information talking about you while their family's in the office or where they're sitting? And if you're using your personal computer, some companies are allowing this at this point. It's not my recommendation, but due to the hardships of trying to actually get company-owned laptops to all employees, they're allowing people to use their personal computer. So if you are doing that, one of the key goals is to make sure that you're disconnecting from all work-related websites, your VPNs, all that kind of stuff after every use. Don't let your family members use that computer until you've ensured that there aren't any active connections into your network, or that you don't have any sensitive data that's actually pulled up on the screen that they might be able to see.
Okay, so I would urge the viewing audience to ask questions if you have them to Jeff, and he'll do his best to answer them. And, obviously this is a best case scenario situation if you can have your own separate computer and a private workspace. But of course, that's not reality for a lot of us right now. We do have children shoulder surfing. We do have other people looking in on us. Maybe we're sharing a computer with the rest of the family. Any particular tips you can give us about how to do whatever we can to maximize the protections that we have when we're logging into our office-based computer network systems?
Absolutely. So we'll start with your local Wi-Fi. So if you have your local Wi-Fi, you want to make sure that there's a password on there. So make sure that you've changed the default passwords. A lot of people don't realize that every device that you have in your house came with a default password. Your smart thermostats, your phones, your wireless router, all that kind of stuff. If you're broadcasting the identifier so that you can make sure that you see yours, other people can see that as well. So if you have it broadcasting, make sure that you've changed the default password to that router, because people can simply go out there and Google what type of router it is, and they can log in with those defaults and change stuff. Hackers are doing this all the time. It's one of the easiest ways to be able to get into business data now, because they've realized that most people are working from home. So if you're working from home and I get into your router, I'm going to be able to see all the data that's flowing through your network. So that's an easy way for them to do that. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you've reviewed your company's policies and procedures. What are you allowed to do with that computer or with that data? Are you allowed to put it on your local computer, or how are you accessing that? So those are definitely some big things to keep in mind. If you know how to get into your wireless network to look at the encryption level, we'll always recommend that you go up to WPA2, which is currently the highest. They're coming out with WPA3, but I wouldn't expect anybody to have that. So WPA2 would be the best encryption algorithm that you could use. Ones like WEP, that's been out for years, and it was broken about 20 years ago. So I could hack into that within 10, 15 seconds. It would not take long.
So this all sounds very technical, but the simple question is, for most of us who have these routers in our home and these wireless networks that we have brought into our home, are these sufficient to provide these levels of security that you're talking about?
Yes, most of them that either come from Verizon or Xfinity or whatever, if you're using one of theirs are going to be updated. They send patches to those regularly, and if you have a router that's less than 10 years old, you'll have WPA2, and you'll be able to actually set it to that. We've worked with our clients in the past that are working remote, that have questions about this kind of stuff. We're able to log in with them and kind of show them where they need to go to double check that their settings are what they expect them to be. Understood.
So the tech comes into your home, he sets up your wireless network, he sets up your router. You should, after he's finished or she's finished, you should go back and change the passwords for that router, in other words.
Correct. Yes. Once they're gone, you should make sure that that password gets changed, or you can ask them, hey, how do I change this? Can you help me do that? And they should be able to get you logged in to where you can change the password, and then make sure that obviously they're not looking at the password that you type in. I would say the same thing with your IT staff. If they're remoted in to help you out, I always tell people never, ever, ever give IT your password. They don't need it, and they shouldn't ask for it.
So you mentioned remote in, and I've experienced that, where you have an IT worker or somebody from an outfit like yours at Compufit who can actually come into your computer with your permission and help you set this up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of sharing programs. We're using those now, between Zoom and some of your internal ones. We actually have a remote tool that we use internally at Compufit that allows us to do remote management. And we can actually create a session with you, and then you can accept that session and say, okay, yes, you can come into my machine, and then we can see your desktop and kind of walk you through it. Microsoft Teams allows that. Zoom allows you to share your desktop and give people access into it. Again, it comes down to which program you're comfortable with or that your IT currently uses.
Well, that's an important point, because for people who haven't really thought through any of this and are just watching this for the first time, even though they can't meet face-to-face or have in-person meetings, you can still get help from an IT specialist to come in and help set up the system to be more secure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having somebody be able to remote in and show you how to do it, sometimes that's easier than fumbling through a set of directions that they might email you. So.
Okay, so let's start talking about the employer side. We've talked about what the employee should do at home, and most of that sounds like common sense stuff. Make sure your passwords are
Yes.
constantly refreshed. Don't make them easy to hack or remember. You know, don't use your spouse's name or your pet's name or something like that. And just make sure your work is kept separate and protected from eyeballs. From the
Absolutely.
employer side, what are some of the technical issues that companies need to think about when they want to set up a remote work environment for their employees rather?
So one of the first things, which I'm sure every company has had to deal with, is how do I get my staff access into our current environment? What does that look like? So we've dealt with companies in the past. A lot of them are typically your smaller companies that tend to do it very quickly. And they say, oh, okay, well, everybody has to work remote now. So what can we do to get them in? And their IT person is trying to help and just says, okay, well, I'll just publish our network out to the internet. So people that are using remote desktop, the program RDP, that little computer box that pops up that you can type into, they'll just publish that to the internet. And that's something that hackers are consistently looking for, is those open ports that they can get into your network with. So what we always recommend is that you have a VPN or a virtual private network, or an RDS, which is remote desktop services. There's a gateway that you can set up. And once that's set up, that establishes an encrypted channel for your employees to be able to get into your network to make sure that the data coming through isn't seen by somebody else sitting on the network. Hackers will try and steal any data that they can if it's unencrypted. So the other part of that, if you have set this up and you have a VPN or an RDS server configured for your environment, that's great. The next step is to talk to your IT staff and say, are we up to date? Do we have the latest software? Do we have the latest hardware? One of the biggest issues that a lot of these companies are dealing with now is, from a remote access standpoint, is that hackers are saying, okay, everybody's working from home now. There's no point in trying to hack into their internal network. There's nobody there. Let me try and get them at home. So they're looking at all of these VPN tools that are out there and finding all of the vulnerabilities in those, and that's what they're starting to hack now. So if your software is out of date or your hardware is out of date for your VPN or your RDS connection, that's something to make sure that that gets updated right away, because that'll give you a false sense of security when it's not actually there.
For companies with many different employees working at many different levels, can they make choices about tiering permissions? And do you advise that they think about stuff like that?
They can. I mean, a lot of times, my number one recommendation, and if you take nothing else away from this meeting today, is that every single person that's connecting into your environment from outside of the office should have multi-factor authentication turned on. It doesn't matter if they're the VP or if they're the newest employee who sits at the front desk. Everybody should have it, because hackers are simply looking for credentials to be able to get into the environment. So a tiered approach, we always start with high-value targets. So your executive leadership, your finance teams, anybody that would have credentials that would be worth more. But overall, you want to make sure that everybody is protected when they're coming into the environment.
So you mentioned multi-layer or multi-factor authentication. Why don't you flesh that out for us a little bit? Tell us what that means.
Absolutely. So multi-factor authentication means that you have more than one way that you are authenticating to the network. So a traditional example of authenticating to a network with single factor would be your username and your password. So your username, and your password is something that you created to be able to get into the environment, but those get stolen all the time. Whether it's through phishing or however they get compromised, they're compromised very, very easily and sold on the dark web all the time. We have a dark web monitoring service for our clients, and we get daily emails about issues that are found from what they call credential harvesting, where they've stolen them from somebody. So what multi-factor does is it adds in an additional layer. That can be a challenge question. And you've no doubt seen this when you log into a banking or a credit card site, where it might ask you, what's your mother's maiden name, or what's this? There's an additional layer. What we typically recommend is an application that would be wrapped in your firewall or something that is on the outside of your network that says, okay, I have the username and the password, but now I'm going to get a text message, or I'm going to open up an app on my phone that actually gives me a 6-digit code. Or maybe it sends you a notification on your phone and says, hey, are you trying to log in from this location? And you would hit yes. And then that is kind of the level of two-factor that we typically would recommend.
Okay. If there are any questions out there for Jeff, just type them in and we'll get them answered for you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about written policies and procedures. Now, certainly,
Absolutely.
a corporation or a company or even a small business may have a written employee handbook. They may have a disaster relief plan in place. Where does this where does this sort of thing fit into the written procedures or the written manuals that companies should really start thinking about having?
So one of the things that I've worked with over the past couple of years is disaster recovery business continuity planning. So if I had asked somebody in December or January if they would have a meeting with me talking about business continuity in case there was an international pandemic that would literally force everybody to work from home, I don't think anybody would have taken that meeting. But realistically, we should be developing out what they call business continuity plans. How would you stay solvent in the event of? And then we develop playbooks based off of that. So we would say, okay, if your building burnt down, what would you do? If a virus attacked your computers, what would you do? If ransomware was found on your network, what would you do? So there's all these different levels of being able to say, okay, we need to have some type of planning in place in case something would happen. The worst case scenario is that something happens and then you're planning afterwards and scrambling to figure out, okay, who do I call? If somebody hacked my network, do I need a forensics team to come in and figure out who did it? Do I have to contact local law enforcement? Do I have to contact state, federal? Who is it that I actually have to be dealing with? If I'm a regulated entity, do I have to call for HIPAA? Do I have to call the Office of Civil Rights? Do I have to call HHS? There's all different areas that you might have to contact. So having that up front and knowing what to do is very, very important. And policies and procedures really help your employees understand what's expected of them. A lot of times if there's an issue, the default answer from me or from security will always be, well, what does the policy say? If somebody didn't follow this, did the policy tell them that they needed to, or do we not have any type of line of communication to our employees, letting them know what we expect as a company from them? So developing out a remote management policy or remote workforce policy. What is expected? Did your company tell you, or you as the company, did you tell your employees that they shouldn't print when they're at home? Do they have that capability? Did you tell them that they shouldn't use their personal computer to log into work email? All those types of things are something that should be laid out so that your employees are set up for success and the company set up for success.
Now, you deal with a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries, and some industries have more specialized privacy concerns and could be subjected to individual sorts of issues. You want to walk us through some of those?
Absolutely. So, a great example again is healthcare. HIPAA compliance has been around for a very long time, and it is one of those things that with this brings a whole new level of trying to figure out how to stay HIPAA compliant. HIPAA, GDPR, for those of you that deal with anybody over in Europe, if you have people that come and stay in your hotel, for example, or somebody that comes and works out at your gym and they're from Europe, you're supposed to be GDPR compliant. So, again, and making sure that you have your bases covered there. HHS, Health and Human Services, is part of the company that our government that actually looks over HIPAA violations. The audits are handled by the Office of Civil Rights, but HHS sets the guidelines. They've actually relaxed their guidelines as of a month ago, basically telling people, look, we understand that there's a need for telehealth, right? Everybody's remote now. Nobody wants to go to the doctor, so they don't have to. So how do we ensure that you can get the care that you need, but still do it safely? They've actually relaxed some of their guidance on what they expect people to do, and they're now allowing them to use FaceTime and other programs that wouldn't necessarily be considered HIPAA compliant. So, again, you have HIPAA, you have, for your finance folks, you're going to have GBLA, which they know very well. DFS is for New York. The Department of Financial Services in New York has an entire set of guidelines that all financial services above a certain threshold have to attest to annually. I would say that 90% of companies out there fall into some sort of compliance, because in today's climate, it's expected that from a cybersecurity standpoint, you are doing what's considered due diligence or due care. You are following an industry standard, and you're expected to do so, and that'll help limit your risk.
Let's take a question, if there's one out there. So, Jeff, I don't know if you can see what's on the screen there, but I'll read it. Can you see that? I'll read it out to you if you can.
I can read it.
So, for those of you listening, the question is phishing emails where the hacker claims they have your PW. Best practices to report the email platform, delete or disregard. Is that enough?
So it's not enough. If somebody emails you and says that they have your password, your PW, the goal would be to change your password right away. The other caveat that I would ask is, do you have multi-factor enabled on your email? Business email compromise is the #1 issue that most businesses are facing right now. It's phishing emails. People fall for it every single day. It's no longer the Nigerian prince who needs $10,000 to give you $1 million. It's very, very sophisticated now. They're using spear phishing techniques where they've actually understood who you are. They get into your email and they will sit in your email sometimes for days or weeks, and they'll watch the way you form your emails. They'll see how you sign it, what your signature looks like, what your terminology that you typically use. I've dealt with lots of wire fraud in the past where they've actually told people, look, I know you're supposed to call me after this, but just go ahead and use this as my confirmation, and please do as I ask. And people fall for it. I've seen companies lose $300,000-$400,000 because somebody didn't follow the proper processes. So you want to make sure that you're changing your password if somebody tells you that they know your password. And my suggestion would be to make sure that you have some sort of multi-factor enabled on that account. So even if they have your password, it doesn't matter, because they would need that second form of authentication to actually be able to get into your account. I hope that answers.
Okay, we'll take one more question. We'll take one more question before we move on. And the question is, in general, how have the wireless networks been holding up? Have your clients reported any significant difficulties? All right, so this is potentially a big problem now. You've got, millions of first-time users who are putting a lot of pressure on our wireless networks. And, what has been your experience so far for how the networks are holding up?
I think overall the networks are holding up really, really well. I think the problem at the very beginning was simply, you had a high latency, meaning that things were slow, simply because typically most internet service providers, ISPs like Verizon or Xfinity, different companies like that, they throttle the bandwidth. So they might tell you that, you purchased 50 megs of internet down, right? And you said, okay, that's the package that I want. Technically, it's only up to 50. So the entire area that you live in uses what's called shared bandwidth for the most part. Some companies don't do that anymore, but most do. So you will see, okay, maybe I'm only getting 20 now. But they have actually been asked by the government to kind of loosen the restrictions on their throttling. So We've seen at the very beginning it was slow. There was a lot of latency, but it's starting to get a lot better.
So working remotely and logging into your systems from your home computers is just one of a number of things that are going on with the new work paradigm. I'm told that in olden times, people would actually have face-to-face meetings, both with their staff and with their clients and customers. But that doesn't really happen anymore, at least not for the time being. And we've all started navigating to this new paradigm of video conferencing. Almost every organization I know has adopted to some sort of video conferencing standard for their meetings. How much has that grown in the past month?
It has grown exponentially. I mean, Zoom's a great example where they are now servicing over 200 million participants in a day. So when you think about, like you said, the olden days of 2 months ago when people used to fly around the world and go meet people face to face and build that rapport, it's now all done through video conferencing. So that has been a huge, huge area of growth. And I think it'll stay like that for some time, even after people are allowed to travel. Obviously Zoom's had its issues publicly stated, and they've done, in my opinion, a very, very good job of responding to the issues and dedicating a lot of time and resources. What was originally meant to be a assistance to people in a time of isolation turned out to unfortunately not work well for their company. But again, like I said, they've fixed a lot of their security holes, and it's really allowing people to engage in a way that they never did before. And that, I think is priceless. To be able to still have happy hours and meetings and be able to see people and interact is huge.
I think it's opening up an entirely new world of business, not just for the companies that are starting to migrate towards it, but things like telehealth and telemedicine are now finding these sorts of tools very effective. Zoom is the most popular. There are others. There's WebEx and some others as well. You may have your favorites, but if we stick with Zoom, because that seems to be what most people have navigated to. What are some best practices or some Zoom hacks that you might want to share with people?
So some of the Zoom best practices really are, again, one of the biggest issues that Zoom found was that with their public hosted meetings, when people were going on Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, wherever they were posting their links, they were sharing those social media links, or those links on social media and public forums. And I don't think they truly understood what they were doing. So when they shared that out, anybody that could see their profile had access to that meeting. If they just clicked on that link, it brought them in. So, again, one of the biggest things that we've been advocating towards is saying, look, you have to understand who you're sharing this with and what implications that could have. So these Zoom bombings, a lot of them, unfortunately, were because of people sharing those publicly. The other thing that you want to make sure is that if you're using your personal ID, don't use that for public meetings. When you start a Zoom meeting, you can actually have it create it's a meeting ID, a randomly generated automatically meeting ID. And that's the best way to do it if you're doing it publicly. If you have internal meetings that you're having on a weekly basis with your colleagues, then using the personal one is fine. But that personal one never changes. So, if you're the Prime Minister of England and you choose to accidentally show your screen and it has your personal meeting ID, now anybody can get in. So the goal there is to make sure that, you keep your private or your personal one for private use, and you generate a random one for public use. You also never want to give anybody control of your screen. So if you're hosting a meeting, make sure that host only is the one that can actually share their screen, and that you can't give control to anybody else, or that they can't just actively take it from you. That's another way that people have actually been able to get into meetings and take over and put all the different things that you've heard about being put on the screen. You can manage your participants. By default now, Zoom has set it up that everybody goes into a waiting room. So if you don't recognize who they are, they're not logging in with the email invite, they're not coming through that way, like, you don't have to let them in. It's a really nice feature that wasn't there before all of these issues happened, or at least it wasn't there by default. It was there, but you actually had to turn it on. This way, they made it by default. An easy way that you can set up two-factor authentication just for your meeting is that you can send the invite in one email, or you can post it on social media, and then say, if you want to join the meeting, send me an IM, send me an email back saying, yes, I want to attend. And then you can send them a second message or an instant message that has the actual password to get in. So you can kind of set up your own two-factor authentication that way to make sure that only the people that you want to come into your meeting have the ability to get in. If you do find that you have some unruly participants, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the Prime Minister of England, and it got national press when his cabinet meeting was shared on social media, and he had his private Zoom number up there. And you don't have to be Saul Berenson or Carrie Matheson from Homeland to know that, that would be pretty useful for not only foreign powers, but just for, hackers who, want to know what's going on with a nuclear power. So maybe not his best moment.
Absolutely.
Probably a lot of us are experiencing. A lot of us are experiencing that as we kind of get used to this new paradigm.
It's
and
hard.
also,
there's going to be a learning curve.
Yep, go ahead. I didn't mean to talk over you. So.
I'm sorry. I was going to say there's a learning curve to any new technology, and that's kind of why, from Compufit's perspective, our goal was to build out a best practices and send it out to all of the different clients that we represent, just to make sure that they understand what is happening and how to use this technology and really how to protect themselves, because it is hard. There's always a learning curve, and you're always going to, learn hopefully from other people's mistakes and not your own. So if we can learn from the Prime Minister's mistakes, I'd say that's better for us.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I think this is all very useful information, obviously very important. Now, if people need help, this is all very technical and very complicated. Where can folks turn to if they need some help?
So if people need help, again, I would always start with their current IT and really be able to judge where are you at with your current IT. If it's internal or if you're using a managed services provider, have that candid discussion with them. How do you feel about security? How do you feel we are secure coming in and out of the network? What is your stance on people using personal machines? What are the risks? What are we doing? What risks are we now introducing by changing the entire way we operate? And if you're not getting the answer that you want from them, then it's seeking outside counsel. Again, that's something that Compufit does very well. We have an entire team of executive leaders that can help from the technology side, from the oversight side, and me from the security side, of being able to come together and say, okay, here's what we've done. We've done an assessment of your network or the way that you're currently set up, and these are the recommendations of what we would suggest that you do to make sure that you are secure.
Well, I want to thank Jeff Wilson, the Chief Information Security Officer of Compufit, for joining us today and sharing his thoughts on cybersecurity in a remote work environment. This video is going to be made available through our business intel and on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you want to reach out to us, you can reach us on our website at www.westchester.org. You can email us at info@westchester.org. And I urge you all to also like us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and to join our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. So that's it for now. This is Michael Romita, the President and CEO of the Westchester County Association, thanking all of you, and in particular our Platinum sponsors, for letting us produce this in the latest of our live stream video chats. And thank you, Jeff, again, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.